Chapter 17, Petunia to the Rescue.
The bear came snarling down the embankment, rising on its hind legs out a thunderclap of a roar. Cutwater dropped the prince and was off like a greyhound. Hold Your Nose Billy, his eyes round as snowballs, went charging off into the river. He raised a great splash. If he didn't know how to swim, he learned instantly. Jimmy had reared back, but now Betsy gave a whistle and the bear stopped in its tracks. Good boy, Petunia. That'll do, darling. She slipped the rope back around the bear's neck. Then she bent over to the prince. The low-down bullies, laying stripes on a boy's back. With the bear sniffing him, Prince Brat didn't move a muscle. Rein in your beast, he whispered stiffly. Oh, don't be afraid of Petunia. Gentle as a kitten he is. Here, let me tend to your poor hide. No, give us a look. Thank you, no, the prince exclaimed. Lemmy, ain't you the brave one? Must sting something dreadful. Jimmy watched the prince slowly raise himself off the mud flat. He felt a growing amazement. Prince Brat, a brave one. It didn't seem possible, but gah, there was a cast-iron streak of pluck in him. The prince moved his arms and shoulders. He winced, but then began to brush himself off. Steady on your legs, Jimmy asked. Steady? You should have yelled and bellowed. That's what they wanted to hear. And humble myself, muttered the prince. You never did. Jimmy gazed at him for a thoughtful moment. Then he indicated the two highwaymen. Cutwater had vanished and Hold Your Nose Billy was trying to keep from drowning. Let's be on our way. They're sure to be back after us. Not if you travel with me, said Betsy. Me and Petunia. Jimmy found the horsewhip where Hold Your Nose Billy had dropped it. Betsy and the bear had already started up the embankment and the boys followed. Locks, whispered Jimmy. Ain't we a puckered sight, the both of us, torn up and scruffy? At least no one will take you for a prince. Not far off lay the coach on its side. Hanged if I caught sight of the steep rise of the side of the road, explained Captain Nips. Tipped us over, as you see. Either your horses need spectacles, said Betsy, or you do. Together with Petunia, they lifted and pushed and righted the coach. They piled in and were off. Betsy and her dancing bear rode inside with the prince. Jimmy decided to sit with Captain Nips and watch for the road hazards. They reached the city without further incident, except for being stopped by soldiers. The king's men were clearly looking for a vanished prince, but when a bear poked its head out of the door window, the soldiers stepped back and quickly waved the coach on.
Chapter 18, of assorted events in which the plot thickens thicker.
As soon as the wheels rattled on cobbled streets, Jimmy felt an immense sense of relief. This was his turf, the city. He knew more places to hide than a rat. Approaching the waterside fairgrounds, he saw prisoners in chains being marched aboard a convict ship. It lay in sharp contrast to the festive stalls and banners of the fair. Captain Nips eased the coach between a cellar of live fowl and a juggler tossing colored balls into the brightly noonday air. Thanks for the jolly ride, Hot Potato Man, said Betsy. Come along, Petunia. Let's fetch us a crowd and earn a copper or two. Jimmy collected his battered birdcage. Don't rush off, lad, said Captain Nips, hauling out a canvas load of firewood from under the seat. Ain't I been listening to your stomach rumbling for the last hour? Do you mean me the kindest of filling the kettle at the pump? Soon as the potatoes are boiled up, we'll feast, eh? Anxious as he was to be on his own way, Jimmy hesitated. He was powerful hungry. Then Captain Nips laid a coin in his hand. And while you're at it, stop off at the Cow Lady, the both of you, and get yourselves a couple mugs to drink. Jimmy picked up the handle of the kettle, but almost at once Prince Brat snatched it out of his hands. I'll do it. You? Jimmy replied. It's a servant's work. Then, who'd take me for a prince toting water? He smiled, he laughed. I've never been allowed to carry anything, not in my entire life. Jimmy led the way. He never regarded fetching and carrying as a privilege. Princes and such like were hard to fathom, but the sound of merriment lingered in his head. He'd never before heard Prince Brat laugh. They dodged acrobats and stilt walkers and harp players. Through the hubbub came a great squeaky voice. Jimmy! Rat-catching Jimmy! Turning, Jimmy spied a tall boy wearing a checked cap. It was Smudge tending a sawdust pit squared off by a board fence, and a dog and a rat pit. Beside him stood a stack of rat-filled cages and a black terrier leashed to a post. "By gigs, it's you, Jimmy," said Smudge. "Reckon you call the king by the first name these days? Hello, Smudge. You give up mud, Larkin? I've come up in the world, ain't I? Same as you, Jimmy. How do you like me dog? Best rat fighter you ever saw." With a practiced eye, Jimmy surveyed the cages. "But those rats look tame enough to eat. Off your hand. Best I could afford. Catch me some castle rats and I'll make a special feature. The king's own rats." "Not my line of work in the castle, Smudge. It's not true you're the whipping boy, is it?" Jimmy felt a flush of embarrassment and dodged the question. "I've learned to read and write." "Nah, the bottom truth. I've read many a book from beginning to end." "What's in 'em?" "All nature-o things. I can do sums too." Smudge was impressed. "Ain't that a wonder? I never heard of a rat catcher that could read and write and do sums." "It don't fit. Don't forget your old friends when you grow up to be duke or something." "I aim to go back to the sewers," replied Jimmy stiffly. "I'll catch you some rats first chance." But even as he said it, Jimmy felt a bleak discomfort. He would miss the shelves of books he'd read behind at the castle. In the sewers, he hadn't been aware of his own ignorance. He saw no choice now but to return, but he realized that he'd lost his taste for ignorance. Smudge was saying, "Who's the cove?" "What? Your pal." "This is—" Jimmy caught himself. He began to stammer. "This is—" The prince answered for him. "Friend of Jimmy's." "The name?" "Then friend of Jimmy's." "'Ull do." Smudge put out his hand for a shake. Jimmy caught Prince Bratton's momentary confusion. "He never shakes hands." "Of course I do," said the prince with a quick grin. He took Smudge's hand. "Glad to shake your hand, Smudge." "Likewise." And Jimmy dragged the prince away. Smudge had committed a terrible offense. No one was allowed to shake hands with the prince. "Why did you do that?" "Because I've never shaken hands before." He could be hung for less. The prince was staring at his hand. It felt friendly, trusting. "I may introduce the practice at court when I become king." Jimmy's ears pricked up. "King, is it?" he thought. "So it was just bluster that you might never go back to the castle. Gaw, I hope you don't want to learn to catch rats first." Moments later, they came to a stout old woman with hands as gnarled as tree roots. Beside her, munching grass, stood a cow with a brass ring in its nose. "New milk," the cow lady called out. "New milk, fresh from the cow. Best in the land, new milk." Jimmy handed over the coin. The milk lady fished 2 mugs out of the tub of water, sat on the stool, and began to milk the cow directly into the mugs. Her aim was skilled as an archer's. "Have you heard the earful?" she asked. "Our prince has been abducted." Imagine, the prince replied coolly. She was looking directly at him. "Our darling poor king," she went on, weeping, his royal eyes out, no doubt, though why he'd spring a tear for that little toad, I don't know. A mighty terror, that they say, is that Prince Brat. Pity us the day he becomes king, eh?" She handed over the pair of mugs. Jimmy drank the warm milk down with unbroken gulps, but then he noticed the prince standing motionless, a vague, unseeing look in his eyes. For certain, he knew everyone called him Prince Brat behind his back, didn't he? "Drink up, lad," said the cow lady. "My stars, I've never seen such rags on a boy. They look like cast-offs from the old clothes man." She gave out a joking laugh. "Drink up before you scare off my business." The prince drained the mug and shuffled away. As they filled the potato kettle at the pump, he looked at Jimmy. "Treasonous old woman. I could have her tongue ripped off for lying." But there was no steam in his voice. Taking a whipping was bad enough, but to learn that his subjects dreaded the day he'd grow up and become king had deeply shaken him. "She meant no harm," Jimmy murmured, keeping his eyes alert for the soldiers. "Is that what they call me, Prince Brat?" Jimmy nodded. "Does everyone hate me?" "More than likely." "What about you?" Jimmy hesitated for a moment. "I did, but maybe I don't." Jimmy couldn't sort out his feelings. "The pot's full. Let's go." It took the two of them to carry the iron kettle, now full of water. They passed the magician with a bald head, a street fiddler, an umbrella seller, his wares opened around his feet like black silken mushrooms. Suddenly, they loomed up a soldier on a horseback, his eyes on the search. There was nothing to do but brazen it out. Jimmy took a tighter grip on the handle, but was ready to fly if he had to. The soldier passed by, only with the merest glance. What was he looking for? A prince in fine velvets, a crown cocked on his head? Was it clothes that made a prince? Jimmy wondered, just as rags made a street boy. He had a notion that the prince felt secretly disappointed not to be recognized by any of his subjects. Was he getting his head stuffed with surprises? Before long, potatoes were boiling in the pot. Not far off, Betsy had drawn a crowd with Petunia, now balancing a gentleman's hat on his nose, and then the bear began passing the hat for tips. Jimmy no longer felt the slightest concern about the soldiers. He had no doubt that the hold-your-nose Billy would trace him and the prince to the fair. Hadn't they fallen into the company of a girl with a trained bear? Where else would she be going? Finally, Captain Nips began spearing boiled potatoes, and Betsy returned with Petunia. "We could eat a bushel," she exclaimed, jingling a handful of coins. "Courtesy to your fellow artisans," said Captain Nips, refusing the money. He split open a pair of plum potatoes, salt and pepper. "Pepper for me," said Petunia. Captain Nips reached into one coat pocket for a pinch of salt, and then into the other for pepper. "Salt for me," said Jimmy. "And you?" Captain Nips asked the prince. The heir of the throne balked for a moment, and then Jimmy knew why. He certainly had never eaten potatoes before. In the castle, roots were regarded as peasant food. I don't know," the prince stammered. "When in doubt, salt," chuckled Captain Nips, and then he began calling out the passing crowd. "Hot potatoes! Hot potatoes!" Captain Nips, "Hot potatoes!" Jimmy gorged himself, anxious to be off, and not certain when he would eat again. The prince nibbled at first with his fingers and then threw his royal pride to the wind. He bit off whole mouthfuls. A bowed seller was working his way through the crowd, crying out his wares. He waved a bamboo pole with long streamers fluttering from the tip. "3 yards of songs, a copper. Old songs, new songs, sing 'em yourself. 10 verses of poor pitiful Polly will make you weep. 16 verses of notable highwaymen, hold your nose Billy." Jimmy's ears pricked up as the ballad seller began singing a sample of his merchandise. "Hold your nose Billy, a wild man he is. Hang him from the gallows trees. Here he comes, there he goes. Don't forget to hold your nose." The street song had once amused Jimmy, but now he only sharpened his eyes. He wiped his hands on his sleeves and turned to Captain Nips. "Thanks for the grub, sir." "Where are you off to?" asked Betsy. "Here's the place to put a jingle in your pockets. Can't you turn cartwheels or something?" "I catch rats," Jimmy said simply. "Rats?" Betsy made a face. "What on earth for? There's good money in sewer rats. The meaner the better." "My eyes!" exclaimed Betsy. "Don't you get bit?" "Many a time," said Jimmy. Captain Nips cocked an ear. "What's that running patter yelling about?" A crow-like voice pierced the air, and then the news seller appeared, his tongue wagging like a bell clapper and a bundle of broadsides under his arm. "Prince sold the gypsies, the true and the genuine facts. Ink still wet. Whipping boy charged with dastardly scheme. King offers reward for the unspeakable rascal. Dead or alive, full description. Get your copy. Keep your eyes peeled and catch the reward." The running patter was selling his broadsides almost as fast as he could yell. The facts were cockeyed, but Jimmy grabbed his birdcage, backed off, and was gone.